morning chatters quietly beneath the marble's warning. A scrim expands from east to west over everything without light. Darkness striking the surface of everything. Across the dust again in the sun. Walking where the herders cross. In rainy season, hot and dry, grass turns to breaking. The weeping ground slips, light from backyard to small window, leaking rainwater into a bucket beneath a drain. Stretching away as the rain rushes to resolve a sheer stocking of light through the floodgates, painting strokes of copper arched over dayspring, years of newsprint regarding the ruination of the world sit beneath glassy eyes. Pointed teeth and silver flesh turn wet with blood. The basket weavers sell charcoal to buy maize, flour, and oil. With the coins they make, they hope to buy water. Today you are rich. Tomorrow, you have nothing, they say. I watch men in the shallow river catch fish in their hands. I scrape mud walking with a refraction of light from hill and mountainside, walking the long walk home. The storm gives itself up to upheaval. At night, I dream of water. Water falls clean. Water washes me. Silver blue ribbons pulls my hair down long over the ends of my legs and arms. Water smooth and pretty. Melt water running off the sky. Fresh as morning. Water touches me. Sings me its secrets. All water has perfect memory and is forever trying to get back to where it was.
Oxygen atom, two hydrogen atoms connected by covalent bonds. Water, vital for all known forms of life. It is nearly as old as the universe itself.
Water. It covers 71% of the Earth's surface. It moves continuously. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus wrote, "No man ever steps in the same river twice." It is a source of exploration and a source of discovery.
Forever trying to get back to where it was.
Evaporation, condensation, precipitation. As it cycles from the sea to the air to the land and back to the sea again, water shapes our planet and nearly every aspect of our lives.
Perfect memory. Smooth, clean, clear water.
In many religions, it is sacred. From birth to death, we are baptized, washed, purified.
All water
Water.
has perfect memory.
It's tasteless, odorless, transparent.
All water has perfect memory. Forever trying to get back to where it was. Water. If we are not its captive audience, water ill-tempered will demand our attention. The stories water has left behind, a select few, only a drop in the river of recall. Lean in. Listen.
We think we control it. Those who lack water, well, you think that's someone else. Those who suffer from too much water?
Well, that's just a temporary thing? No. Our world is changing. Our climate is changing. Our relationship with water is changing.
I'm Michelle Norris.
And I'm Eve Tro.
And this is NPR Presents Water. Many of us have lived in a Goldilocks world of water. Not too much, not too little.
But right now, 80% of California is experiencing extreme drought. A few years ago, Hurricane Sandy shoved the Atlantic onto the streets of New York City. We now live in a changing world.
And nowadays, when there's a killer heat wave or serious drought somewhere, people wonder, is this climate change at work? It's a question scientists have struggled with for years. When is it a change in climate that's altering weather events, and when isn't it? Almost all climate scientists expect there will be more extreme weather events if the planet warms up much more. Heat waves, huge storms, droughts. But then there have always been periodic bouts of extreme weather on Earth long before climate change. How do you tell the difference between normal variation in weather, including these rare extremes, and what climate change is doing? That sort of discernment is difficult. So scientists have had a rule, a kind of mantra. You can't attribute any single weather event to climate change. It could just be weird weather.
A lot depends on how much scientists can determine about the frequency and intensity of extreme weather in the past to determine normal variation. Also, some events, like heat waves, are fairly simple. They're caused by heat. Storms and droughts are caused by multiple things: wind patterns, rainfall, the amount of moisture in the soil, which makes it harder to detect the fingerprint of climate change.
And it's this kind of information that will help people prepare in a world that is already changing. The first successful English colony in America was at Jamestown, Virginia, the swampy island on the James River. The colony endured for almost a century, and even today you can see its ruins and walk where Captain John Smith walked. But Jamestown is now threatened. Scientists say rising sea levels could submerge the island by century's end.
In springtime, Jamestown is a carpet of bright new grass. There's oak and loblolly pine, and the James River lies on every horizon. Beneath a towering stone monument, a young woman in a woolen smock and peasant blouse greets a gaggle of tourists.
Well, I be Mary Buck, Mistress Buck by name. They had me come here into town to greet ya.
Mary Buck is played by a Jamestown living history interpreter. She attempts the accent for flavor.
Well, thank heavens, here you are where God intended you to be, right here in Jamestown, in the year 1607.
She engages the crowd in a tutorial about Jamestown.
And so let's see, how many ships were there? That's right, 3. Do you know the names of those ships, young man over there?
Those ships reached America before the Mayflower did. They were sent by the Virginia Company of London. The colonists weren't planning to build a nation. They just wanted to make some money and keep the Spanish out.
This island fit the bill. Militarily speaking, it's a very good place to be. The water here be very deep, and you can defend yourself.
But now it's that very water that threatens to destroy Jamestown.
A warming climate heats the oceans and makes them expand. Melting glaciers and ice sheets add more water. The result, the sea level is rising. Climate scientists say it could rise 2 or 3 feet by 2100, maybe more.
Coastal flooding will increase, and eventually, without human intervention, Jamestown could go under. It has been slowly getting wetter and wetter for the last 400 years. It's estimated to be, 4 feet lower relative to sea level? Or sea level is 4 feet higher than when the colonists set foot on it. In fact, it wasn't an island when the colonists got here. And we are sinking.
Water means land.
In Detroit recently, activists have appealed to none other than the United Nations over the city's move to shut off the water of thousands of residents.
The Detroit Water and Sewerage Department says half of its 323,000 accounts are delinquent. They've begun turning off the taps of those who do not pay bills that total above $150 or that are 60 days late. Since March, up to 3,000 account holders have had their water cut off every week. A local protester says,
I want to tell you why 6 kids on this porch, when they came to shut off the water, and their parents had to run to try to find out how they gonna pay their water bill. Now, I want to tell you well about another woman. She pregnant. She had a 2-year-old. She holding a bill for $400 in her hand, and she begging the man, don't turn off my water. A pregnant woman with a $400 bill. You gonna close the water off for a woman with a $400 bill who pregnant and got a 2-year-old? Oh, shame on you.
in a submission to the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the human right to safe drinking water and sanitation, activists say Detroit is trying to push through a private takeover of its water system at the expense of basic rights. The group Food and Water Watch said, by denying water service to thousands, Detroit is violating the human right to water.
A pregnant woman with a $400 bill. You gonna close the water off on a woman with a $400 bill who pregnant and got a 2-year-old. Shame on you.
The poverty rate in Detroit is approximately 40%, and people have seen their water bills increase by 119% within the last decade. Most of the residents are African American. 2/3 of those impacted by the water shutoffs involve families with children. Meanwhile, the Detroit Water and Sewerage Department, or DWSD, has defended its actions, saying the water shutoffs are necessary for alleviating the department's debts.
We are trying to work with people more aggressively, put it that way. We're trying to get them either on payment plans or to get the bills paid.
Right.
And it's worked. It has. We've lowered our debt a little bit by doing that.
We're getting conflicting information.
The state chair of the Michigan Welfare Rights Organization.
We're told that it's anywhere from 3,000 shutoffs per month to 3,000 per week. It is historical for the Detroit Water and Sewage Department to not give its residents information. But at our offices at Michigan Welfare Rights, we are getting 30 to 40 calls an hour where people are saying, I have a water bill and I'm afraid that my water is about to be cut off. Or, my water has already been cut off. What can you do to help us and give us some information? So, it is scandalous. And we live in the Great Lakes. And to have your water threatened and people told that if your bill is $150 or more, you're on a block, a chopping block, where your water is going to be turned off. Well, in Michigan, it is particularly egregious because a household that has welfare involvement and water is turned off with minor children in a home means that protective services can come in and take the children out and put them in foster care. And in a foster care home, you can earn more money as a foster parent than you can as a birth mother. It's just scandalous what's going on in Detroit. It's scandalous. Water means money.
I watch men in the shallow river catch fish in their hands. I scrape mud, walk the long walk home.
We take water for granted. I mean, you don't know what you have until you lost it, right? Like when there's a drought, oh, you get it. You get how important water is. But what about the drought of shelter? And by that I mean homelessness. I'm homeless. I work for a suburban railroad in New York as a train car inspector. Yeah, that's right, I work every day. So how did I become homeless? Well, hell, we all just one step away from it. I'm telling you, for everyone. Yeah, everyone. That door is always open to a door being closed.
In New York City, the number of homeless people is the highest since the Great Depression. Nearly 57,000 people are in shelters right now, of which more than half are children. But this number doesn't count the number of individuals who are on the street.
Or in the parks, or in the subways.
Or in a small network of shelters housed in faith-based and community organizations scattered around the city, run entirely by volunteers. They call that the Respite Bed Program.
Yeah, I'm one of those. I go with 9 other men to a faith-based shelter. It's a small room with no windows. We all sleep on cots with linens with stamps on them, stamps that say they come from the prison system or the public hospital. You know, the throwaways. I guess we the throwaways too, I suppose. Yeah, but some of us are luckier than others. I mean, I am. Look here. This place, I'm in a shelter with water.
There are about 45 small shelters in this network that provide an overnight stay to individual men and women throughout the 5 boroughs of New York. And only 3 have a shower.
With hot water.
It's true that the drop-in centers have some showers. Drop-in centers are places where individuals can come off the street to get social services and, after some screening, get a bed in the Respite Bed Program.
And those showers at the drop-ins, well, they rarely run hot water. They more often than not are broken, and even when they work, hey, you wouldn't want to step foot in them. It takes a brave man to use them. Or at least a man with some sort of medical insurance. You get it? Hey, look, they say the answer to homelessness resides in work. You know, find a job, save some money, get a room of one's own dignity. Dignity in work. Dignity. How is one supposed to carry dignity around when he has no access to hot running water? Now, what's that expression? Don't give a person a fish, teach him to fish, then he'll have fish for the rest of his life. Well, look, I don't need lessons on how to use water. I need the water. I say give a man hot water and you giving him his humanity. Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. I mean, every evening I can come to this respectful place, and before I go off in the morning to make sure trains are safe, I can be a person and take a hot shower. You don't know what it means having something until you don't. You don't know what it means. Water means dignity.
The danger and devastation caused by Hurricane Sandy and the 4 floods that have hit my city, Hoboken, New Jersey, since have moved me to action.
Hurricane Sandy was the second costliest storm in U.S. history, surpassed only by Hurricane Katrina. Over $68 billion in damage is the estimate so far.
My strategy includes purchasing land and building new parks to help absorb rainwater and retain as much rainwater as possible, and also updating the city's drainage and pumping systems. You see, we need to figure out a way to live with water.
Sandy was the largest Atlantic hurricane ever recorded, reaching 1,000 miles in diameter.
We're living with climate change now. We've had 4 major flood events since that hurricane, so that means people's cars are totaled, people's homes are still getting flooded. We're seeing it on a regular basis, these heavy downpours. So to a certain extent, the climate change assessment that recently came out reaffirming what we absolutely have to do. Hoboken can be a model for this.
Over 200 people died as a result of the storm.
We have an opportunity that was impossible for other species. I'm sure that if the dinosaurs could have predicted the ice age coming,
Actually, an asteroid was what wiped out the dinosaurs.
yes, absolutely, and developed a plan. They would have done it. But they couldn't do that. We can do this. We can adapt, and we must adapt.
Given the higher sea levels in the future, even if storms remain exactly the same, we're going to get more frequent flooding events in the Northeast. Maybe 3 times as many coastal flood events by the end of the century.
As the mayor of Hoboken, I mean, this is the #1 priority for me. This is the biggest challenge that our city is facing. We are living with this now. Water means danger.
One bucket of water for one person for one day. It's reality now for millions of people. An American taking a 5-minute shower uses more water than the average person in a developing country uses for an entire day. Think about that. Think about this too. More people have a cell phone than a toilet. According to the United Nations, in America, we use 150 gallons of water a day for each person to grow food, make energy, bathe ourselves, water our lawns, wash our cars. In Ethiopia, each person gets 4 gallons a day. 4.
In March of 2003, just as the war in Iraq had begun, I was staying in a small hut of a middle-aged Ethio-Somali woman in Jijiga, Ethiopia. Jijiga is an eastern border town near Somalia, and in the best of times is not an easy place. But back then, with the start of the war and me being a young American woman, it was a dangerous time in a dangerous place. And what was I doing there? Well, I was collecting interviews of Somali women on female genital cutting for my doctorate. Now, I'm not a person of privilege. I grew up in America as a woman of color on the lower rung of the economic ladder. And really, I'm keenly aware there are other cultural senses of life, other ways to be. There in Jijiga, I knew that where I came from was not where I was. We have to have respect for other. Because, well, the point is that there is no other. There is only the diversity of life, and if we are to know anything, if we're to find knowledge, our search should embrace diversity. I knew this to be true. But heck, in Jijiga, what I didn't know was where to take a shower or use the bathroom. So right at the beginning of my stay, I asked my host that basic question. She looked at me, her face like brown leather stretched over bone, and smiled, pointing to where there was a large stone hole in the ground. Then she turned and handed me a bucket of water for my use. Okay, I suppose to call it a bucket might be sort of an embellishment or an exaggeration. I mean, it was more like a slightly broken, oversized plastic cup, the size of one of those giant 7-Eleven containers for their big gulp Slurpee drinks. I took the bucket and thanked my host and went out to find the hole in the ground. I looked around at the house with its hard, cracked mud walls. The air was filled with dust. With every step, the ground erupted in dust, and the footsteps of goats and camels, often passing in packs, attached to one another with ropes, made the air a perpetual swirl of dust. Being careful not to spill the water I was carrying, I soon came upon the spot. Flies gathered. I looked around and nope, no one was around. And I emptied the entire contents of the bucket for my toilet use. But wait, there was still a shower to attempt. I didn't know what to do. I walked back to the house with my empty container and, well, at the time it seemed reasonable to ask my host for a refill. The cup looked, I don't know, small and inadequate. I asked for a second helping. My host, in her humble attempt to pay attention to my needs, didn't say anything. She simply went to the place where she got water and began to scoop out the remnants of what was left for the day. There she was, in her multicolored cotton dress, accented by a beautiful scarf, scraping for water for me. Like the shower I wanted to take, a rain of shame fell all over me. Here I was, educated, studying for a doctorate, and yet how could I be so ignorant? I couldn't do anything now. If I were to interrupt her efforts to find me new water, I would only risk raining shame on her. I stood and watched and did nothing. She handed me the second bucket of water, and I walked back to the stone hole in the ground. The dust was still swirling, the flies were still buzzing and busy. This time, I had to learn something. I had to teach myself how to use water. I was determined never, never to ask again for more than my share. I thought to myself, well, let's see. If I start washing from the top, my head, and slowly work my way down, there'll be some water left as the rinse will collect, and I'll be able to use the remains for my toilet needs. Just a little bit here and a little bit there. Be frugal. Be careful. The water now falling on me felt, I don't know, different. I looked down and was so proud of the leftovers. Water is often precious. Water is always valuable. Water means life.
The International Bottled Water Association commissioned its first ever study to figure out how much water goes into producing 1 liter of bottled water. The results released this month show that for North American companies, it takes 1.39 liters to make 1 liter of water. That's less than the global average of a liter of soda, which requires 2.02 liters of water. A liter of beer, meanwhile, needs 4 liters of water. Wine demands 4.74 liters. Hard alcohol, it turns out, is the greediest, guzzling 34.55 liters of water for every liter.
Rainy season, hot and dry, turns the grass to breaking. At night, I dream of water.
Close your eyes for a moment. Go ahead, close your eyes. and dream of a place where rainwater drips from the needles of tall evergreens and oceans lap at the rocks along the shore, where the dampness leaves a sheen on your skin. No shortage of water here, right?
It's one of the maritime provinces. Several bodies of water surround it. Its lifeblood has been and is the sea, and yet, for a small community in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, water was the problem. It stunk. It stained clothes. It clogged pipes. It caused diarrhea. No matter where a well was dug, it was the same. Sulfur-infused water was a stubborn and nefarious irritant, and the half-dozen families in the Terre Noire, this tiny enclave about 4 miles north of Marguerite Harbor, had had enough.
This was 30 years ago. It's the same now as it has been for generations. Even if you were born in Terre Noire with its small vestige of Acadian life, and you leave for a few months, for any reason, you are forever considered from away. Imagine what I was considered, being from Brooklyn, New York, when I found myself living there for a time. After a few months of the rumors that I was going to grow marijuana had died down, I was welcomed for the quiet I brought. All I wanted to do was to look out the window and write. Originally, I came for just a few weeks to work with a fellow American who had settled there in the 60s. But the siren call of the Gulf of St. Lawrence claimed me. You see, water is the soul of the island, in one way or another.
Water is everywhere in Cape Breton. It not only surrounds this land at the north end of the Canadian province, it's in the air as fog or mist or rain or snow. The only place it isn't is in the ground as a potable commodity. Dig a well in Terre Noire, and you're liable to taste and smell the sulfur buried in the black earth for which the town was named.
This I found out, of course, after I spent every penny I had to buy a spit of land and start a house. I was building this small house on a cliff overlooking the water. And while the blind electrician, yeah, that's right, the oldest and best electrician on the island was blind. His son made sure everything worked, and it always did. Anyway, Willie, that's the blind guy's name, was working. While he was working, my neighbor from across the Cabot Trail, the main north-south highway that divided my land, he warned me that there's no point in digging. You can't get decent water. Oh, great. But, he said, we have a way to get water if we all do it together. I had no idea what he was talking about. Well, they were going to dig 3 enormous holes to collect spring water free from sulfur, and they were sure the springs were up there. You see, they used a stick to find the right spots. One of those divining sticks. Oh boy. Then they were going to lay a series of pipes growing slightly less in diameter as they go all the way down the mountain under the frost line into the basement of Clovis's house, my neighbor. The pressure will be enormous, Clovis told me. And he said we'd be able to hook up all 4 houses in the area, including mine. But my house is across the road on the coast, I told him. Clovis didn't even flinch. He told me all I have to do is to dig a hole under the highway and run a pipe. No big deal. You just give the security deposit to the town. What? Wait, I said, what do you mean? You know, he said, in case you rip up the road, you have to pay for the repair. Repair? The highway? Oh, don't worry, he said. I know a guy, he an expert. He can dig the hole, he has a machine. That sounds expensive, I told him. No, Clovis said. You just have to let his wife pick some blueberries on your property, and you pay him for his gasoline. Before I knew it, Clovis had it all arranged. And the next day, a wooden pickup truck arrives with 2 enormous people inside. They both got out. This large woman had a basket and immediately bent over and started picking blueberries. Oh, quite a sight. The man pulled out from the back of his truck a tiny generator with a rubber hose attached to it. At the end of the hose, there was a small, oversized bullet-looking thing. Looked kind of like an egg. This was their hole-digging machine. Oh, I thought, I'm done for. I not only wouldn't have water, but I'd be spending every last cent fixing the highway. After digging a small trench and placing the silver egg in it, this giant man started the compressor, and the egg started moving forward in a punching motion. It punched a hole right into the ground and disappeared under the highway. Then the man in his blue overalls ran to the middle of the road, fell to his knees, and bent over, his ear now to the pavement. That's right. An enormous man was in the middle of the highway, his ear pressed against the road. Clovis whispers to me, "I told you, he's an expert." All of a sudden, the silver bullet, the egg, appeared on the other side. The egg had made it. The egg, not the chicken, had made it across the road. A hole was dug under the highway. I stood there looking at the faces of all my neighbors. They were by this time all gathered around, and they were so proud. No, not proud of their accomplishment of finding, harnessing, and soon to be running amazingly pure spring water into their homes. No. They were proud of helping me, from away, to share in their new resource. A resource that had eluded them for so many years. Fresh, clean water. I had wonderful water flowing into my house by the sea. No electric pump. As they predicted, gravity pushed the mountain spring water to the second floor of my house so hard, I never had to turn the faucet all the way. Water means community.
Did you know the secret to a perfect cup of coffee is water? Did you know that? There was a study published by the Royal Society of Chemistry that found that the chemical composition of different kinds of water is key to bringing out the different flavors of the coffee bean. If you use tap water, let it run for a few seconds before filling up your pot. Never use distilled or softened water, and always use cold water.
Leave it to NPR to tell you how to make a damn cup of coffee.
There are people from all over the world who find Mexico to be a way station on the way into the United States, despite the fact that this border looms so large in our public debate and in our kind of consciousness about so many issues. There's a lot of ignorance about that border and how life is really lived.
Members of a group, all of them from Mexico, apparently had no idea they would have to cross more than 50 miles of desert to reach the closest road. And they lacked the water and the know-how to survive the blast furnace 115-degree heat. 5 days after the men and teenage boys set out to enter the United States illegally through southern Arizona, 14 of them were dead from exposure. It was the deadliest attempt to cross the border in Arizona history. They were caught in an area Border Patrol agents call the Devil's Path, brutal country east of Yuma. The area has become increasingly popular with border crossers because of stepped-up patrols elsewhere. 12 people survived, with at least one telling doctors he drank his own urine in desperation. The survivors were treated for severe dehydration and kidney damage. A Tucson pastor who sets up water stations for border crossers tells us,
People are very, very ill prepared for the distances and dangers and threats to their lives. For many of the people who cross, they have no idea what they are about to encounter. Water means boundaries.
Can you describe this photo? Literally, like, what does it look like?
Okay, this is a photograph from the era of Fort Proctor, which is off the coast of Shell Beach. And to the right of well, Fort Proctor is sort of dangling out into the Lake Bourne without any land really under it. The land is pulling back along the coastline, and to the right is a canal that's cut out of the marshes that's allowing salt water into the freshwater marsh, disintegrating the marsh. Below, at the very bottom of the picture, is a bunch of rocks from Mr. Go, the Mississippi River Gulf outlet, which actually was very detrimental to the wetlands near Louisiana, and to a great extent was responsible for the levee break in the Ninth Ward.
I'm talking with a New Orleans native who's been covering coastal issues with her camera for how long?
Well, you know, I was thinking about this the other day, and it's been, well, over 10 years, because I started before Katrina in a series called Ruminations, where I was just obliquely looking at some of the issues, you know, going down to Grand Isle and Port Fourchon, looking at the oil rigs along the coastline, around the horizon, in every direction. You know, it's very strange. And the drive out there where all the dead trees in the marshes appeared, you know, I realized I drove past those my whole life as a child going out to Grand Isle. So I think I've been thinking about it in a weird way since I was a little kid. Like, why are those trees all dead? But you know, when I was an adult, I would say, my God, there's a lot more trees that are dead. And then the road, I don't remember having been this low. So certain changes I witnessed in my lifetime.
Your dad was an engineer, right?
Yeah, and he used to get really excited when we drove over to Bonnie Carey Spillway, or he would explain things to us that was magical to him. At the time, we didn't quite get why it was so magical. And when they opened the spillway, I was all excited. And you know that was just a couple of years ago that they opened both the Morganza and the Bonnie Carey Spillway, and I was right there to see it, to hear it, to watch it, and it was fascinating watching them control the river flow so it didn't flood the city. He also was very instrumental in telling me that you need to buy a house on the ridge or live on the ridge in the city. And I didn't get the importance of that until after Katrina. You know, that's when it hit home that we need to know the geography of where we live. So after Katrina, I drove along the Black Line, or walked in some cases along where the Black Line showed up on the houses, and I could see what part of the city was how many feet below sea level because of the line, how high or low it was on the houses, if the houses still existed after the storms and after the federal flood. You know, we're like the canary in a coal mine.
Here in Louisiana.
Yeah, because these issues are not just about, you know, land loss. This affects everything.
You seem to have a unique opportunity in presenting a scientific document of what's happening, and also you refer to this as art. So how do you kind of bring those two things together?
Well, I really respect science a lot, and I find that as an artist, I soak up information and then I want to translate it through my own medium and make it a little more communicative to the viewer. So, and not that I'm just trying to illustrate certain things, I'm trying to create an awareness and a consciousness around how things exist right now through my eyes. And so it expands a kind of knowledge about where we live and an appreciation for some of the beauty around where we live, because I don't know if people realize how beautiful the wild wetlands are or how important they are. You know, I mean, my God, like if people understood that marshes, they clean the water. If they're not overwhelmed by the wrong stuff like toxins or salt, they clean toxins out of the water. I mean, they actually, unless they're way over polluted, right? It can kill them. But they host fisheries where we get a lot of our seafood. They absorb storm waters, storm surge when there's hurricanes. They absorb wind sometimes. I mean, if there's trees on the land, even better. If the land is just a little more built up, cypress trees absorb the storm winds. I mean, this is like gold, right? This is our most precious asset, and we're taking this golden path and we're turning it into asphalt in a way, asphalt that's sinking. I mean, literally, what we're doing is trashing our most vital resources and our protection. So I think that's part of the wonder of what I'm trying to look at and think about as an artist and express through my work. Like, for instance, East jetties. When I heard about that, I thought, what the hell does that look like? Oh, I can't say hell.
Yes, you can.
Okay, so, well, the question I'd love to hear after they look at the photos is, how do I go there? Where do I begin to discover some of this myself firsthand? So I've got a bunch of resources for them. You know, I think going out into the marshes, into the forests, the cypress forest, into the swamps, into the houseboats and sit in the water, and then you ride around on a canoe or a little flatboat with a motor is the best way to get to know how gorgeous, how luscious, how vital and important, and why this place is called a paradise. You know, you don't want to look at it as paradise lost, but it's paradise that we're losing. So the best way to understand why people call it paradise is to go and experience it firsthand in the Atchafalaya Basin or down by the very edge of the coastline by Grand Isle or Cocotree if you want to see the marshes. St. Rose even has a beautiful little forest that's not far out of the city if you want to see land loss right away and you don't want to leave New Orleans. Just go to the end of Caffin Avenue in the 9th Ward and you can see Bayou Bienvenue. I mean, if you sit there at the little pier that is existing, or that little, I guess it's a pier, there's some men that are there sometimes. They'll tell you stories about hunting out there when it was a forest. So this happened in a short amount of time, and that's something that's sobering, you know. It took what was it, 7,000 years to create this land, and we're in the newest land in the whole country, and it's only taken 70 years to lose it. That's sobering. Water means
Art.
loss.
The wildfires we're seeing in the southwestern U.S. have almost no precedent. Scientists know how bad wildfires were centuries ago by studying fire scars in tree rings. They say the wildfires now are much more intense and widespread. Warmer air is sucking the moisture out of the ground, out of the trees. Drought is burrowing in, and fire follows.
Something is different now along the Colorado Plateau, the sweep of mountains, valleys, and ponderosa pine forests of the Southwest. The weather pendulum that swings back and forth between hot and cold, wet and dry, is swinging more toward the hot and the dry.
See, what we have now is a gradual trend towards warmer temperatures. So each drought will be a little more intense, and each very good period will be a little less good. At least for the foreseeable human future, it seems.
Prolonged heat turns the atmosphere into a sort of dry sponge, a sponge that sucks more and more moisture out of the ground and out of trees.
It's like thinking about the southwestern United States being transplanted onto another planet. It's a huge change, almost overnight in the ecosystem, you know? You see, when you have predictions and the scientific understanding tells you this is what's coming, and then it starts to happen. You know, the pieces, the dots are obviously connectable, that it's very likely we are seeing the worst thing we expected would happen. And warming is occurring, and it's starting to take out our forests. Now, the fire behaviors have just been off the charts. I mean, they're extraordinary, a tornado of fire. Actually, I think in some cases there's fire behavior that probably these forests haven't seen in millennia, or tens of thousands of years.
If you went up on the other side of Salt River Canyon and looked back, you could see the flames way up in the sky. Scary. How far away? 2 hours driving, so about 120 miles. Fires like that burn everything, even the soil.
The soil converts from something that's like a sponge to saran wrap.
Then when the rains come, they race down those slick mountainsides.
In the aftermath of a wildfire, when this watershed that would flood like the Rio Grande, for heaven's sakes, that would come down as a wall of water, debris and ash and tree trunks, and create devastation. Suddenly, the entire mountain is in your backyard. Water means fire.
Harmful algal blooms that can turn tap water toxic and kill wildlife are becoming more common in coastal oceans and in fresh water across the United States and around the globe.
This year, chemists at the Collins Park Water Treatment Plant in Toledo, Ohio, detected unsafe levels of the toxin microcystin in the water.
It's produced by blue-green algae that blooms across western Lake Erie each summer and sometimes reaches as far east as Cleveland.
Early one Saturday morning, residents of Toledo, over 500,000 people, woke up to news of toxins in the city's tap water and were told by officials not to drink it or even cook or wash dishes in it.
Boiling the contaminated water is not effective. It only concentrates the toxins. Drinking contaminated water could cause nausea, vomiting, possibly hurt the liver, and cause neurological problems.
Governor John Kasich declared a state of emergency and sent in the National Guard with trucks of clean water. Hospitals, prisons, and restaurants all scrambled to cope with the situation.
So many people flocked to stores to buy bottled water that some ran out and they had to ship in more. My restaurant, the one I manage, Burger Bar 419, I had to close it. And I know other eateries had to close too with the limited resources of water. Well, it's not looking good. We could open if we had water. It's hard to scrape together enough water to serve customers.
Recent history would always point to August and September in the western basin area of Lake Erie to be the prime time to have an algae bloom. Sure, we've had episodes in the past since I was a kid in the 70s, but I don't think we ought to look at this as normal for late August or September to have algae and that it's simply a time you should stay away from the lake. I don't think that's an acceptable proposition.
11 million people get their drinking water from Lake Erie.
Water means disease.
Water falls clean. Water washes me with silver blue ribbons, pulls my hair down long over the ends, my legs and arms, smooth and pretty.
The young girl, like so many, is not here to tell this story herself. So, I will tell it. She was a special girl, an unusual girl. You can tell from her eyes. You can see it in her eyes. She was alive in her eyes. From a young age, she seemed unwilling to just accept the fate of an ordinary girl's life. She had a purpose. She wanted to be better, better than what she saw around her. She wanted to make a better life for herself and those around her. She lived in a large village of dust and rocks that sits on a plateau. No bank, no post office, no general store, no power lines, no cellular towers, no place to buy a bottle of water. The girl was bright. She was beautiful. She was clever, but gifted or not, like all girls her age, most of her time was spent working and waiting for water. She'd get up early 4 days a week, grab a clay pot, tie it to her back with a rope, and head to the water source to do her part for her family. A spring was the closest source of water to her home. To get to it, you had to take a dangerous and steep climb down a 700-foot cliff. The rocks were loose and slippery, and women had been known to fall to their death on this path. Once at the bottom of the cliff, the young girl would have to scramble up over giant rocks to finally reach the spring, which truthfully wasn't much of a spring at all. Only enough water seeped out of the rock to fill a few clay pots each hour. Often, the girl would arrive at the spring and then have to wait up to 8 hours for her turn. Sometimes, she'd find the line of pots and women so long that her walk down would be in vain. Even with all of this, the girl would dream about a better life for the people of her village. Things will be changed for us if we work hard and fight to improve our lives, she'd say. And she did work hard. 4 days a week she worked for water, and the other 3 days she would attend school. That walk to school in a neighboring village was a 6-hour round trip. Still, she never shirked her responsibility to bring water home for her family. She knew it was her duty and that they depended on her. Following tradition, at a young age, she was given to be married. Yet, it wasn't entirely without love. The boy chosen was a thin and tall boy with a kind and gentle voice, a childhood friend, And since they were childhood friends, falling in love was easy. She was beautiful to him, and he said they were deep in love. And so they married. The boy spent his days working, earning precious little money. The young girl continued with school and continued working for water. In the evenings together, they ate and both dreamed about an easier life. One day in May, the girl set out before dawn for water. She didn't eat breakfast. She traveled early, thinking she'd arrive at the spring before most of the others and have a shorter wait. She was determined, a determined young girl, determined to do her job. May is the hottest and driest month, and this particular day, she joined her friend on the path, and they journeyed together down the treacherous hill. Upon reaching the area where the water dribbled out of the rocks, they quickly found out they weren't the only ones who had the idea to leave before dawn. They had to wait in line all day before filling up their pots, but they did, and they then headed back up the cliff together. When they reached the peak around 3 o'clock, at the place where the road forked, the young girl said goodbye to her friend and took a right, heading toward her house. Then, could fate be any more cruel? Somehow, the girl slipped and fell. And her clay pot, full of water, smashed into small pieces. She knew her mother and sister were at home waiting for the water. She knew they needed her water to cook dinner. She knew that they depended on her for water. And now, even her clay pot was destroyed. So, rather than continue home down the path empty-handed, this 13-year-old child, this young girl with all her life in front of her, slipped the rope from the pot through the branches of a tree, then around her neck, and hung herself. Water means innocence.
Water means life.
We think we control it.
Coastal flooding will increase, and eventually, without human intervention, Jamestown could go under.
We are sinking.
Water means community.
A pregnant woman with a $400 bill. You gonna close the water off for a woman with a $400 bill who pregnant and has a 2-year-old.
Change.
Only enough water seeped out of the rock to fill a few clay pots.
Dignity.
Well, I don't need lessons on how to use water. I need the water. I say give a man hot water and you've given him his humanity.
You see, we need to figure out a way to live with water.
Water means money.
A sponge that sucks more and more moisture out of the ground and out of trees.
Land.
One bucket of water for one person for one day. It's the reality for millions of people.
If we are not its captive audience, water ill-tempered will demand our attention.
Danger.
Just use a little bit here, a little bit there. Be frugal. Be careful.
It's in the air as fog or mist or rain or snow.
When is it a change in climate that's altering weather events, and when isn't it?
Water is the soul of this island, one way or another.
Fire.
Water means home. The only substance occurring naturally in all 3 states as liquid, solid, and gas on Earth's surface. Water is.
Melt water. Running off the sky, fresh as morning. Water touches me, sings me its secrets.